Hello everyone and welcome to the COO Summit meeting. My name is Kristen and I'll be moderating today's call. Our speaker today is Matt Moreno, AVP of Operational Effectiveness at Unum, presenting Transforming Through Lean. We will turn to the presentation in just a moment, but first I want to go over our web conference instructions. Everyone is currently muted so that the background noise does not become distracting for the other participants. To view today's presentations as the screens change live, please go to the link that was sent to you yesterday, or you can view the PDF that was also included in the email. If you choose to follow us live, you can click anywhere on the page and you'll see the pop-up with the option to make a comment. Feel free to ask questions by clicking on any slide and we'll make sure your questions are answered. Or we can take live questions at the end of the summit. For the newer participants in the group, it might be useful to review some of the main benefits that you can take advantage of as a member at no additional charge. First are the live monthly web conference meetings, which you're already delved into today. I hope you found these useful, and we have an excellent lineup which you can see by going to the website schedule page. Second, we record all of these, so if you're traveling or stuck in another meeting, just log in at your leisure and the full archives of past meetings are available to you with a number of interesting topics. Third, get to know the other members. By logging in, you can see their profiles, and we are glad to make introductions to any if wished. Fourth, if you're wrestling with key issues or decisions, we strongly encourage you to reach out to the other members, and our site makes it easy to post questions. Fifth, we really encourage site visits. If you've not visited others' offices to have a great discussion on best practices and see their facilities, please do so. You can log in to see the other members' companies and cities, and feel free to reach out, or we are glad to make introductions. Sixth, we're also generating executive summaries from each meeting with the key takeaways and learning nuggets so that you can reference them after the meeting and put them into action. Seventh, our members are very busy, so we started a service where we pick out the 6 most interesting articles among thousands or hundreds of sites to keep you abreast to make sure you don't miss key ones. And eighth is our Book of the Month summary you can either read or listen to as you commute. Each month we'll be selecting the most interesting book, then summarizing the ideas, so within minutes you can absorb the key takeaways. There are many other benefits, of course, but I just wanted to highlight some and notify you to keep a lookout in your inbox for these each month. That takes care of all of the housekeeping items. Just give me a moment now to pull up the speaker's presentation and introduce them. I apologize for this delay. Okay, it looks like I am experiencing the same issues that you guys are, so just give me a moment to set up the other presentation on my platform. All right, I have that up. All right, Matt Moreno has 20 years experience across sales, service, claims, and collections operations industry. He also has experience in financial services, insurance, and utilities, and has 12 years Six Sigma Black Belt experience. Matt, thank you so much for being with us today. Just say next when you wish the slides to advance, and the floor is all yours.
Sounds good. Thank you all for having me today. I appreciate the time. So what I was looking to share with the group today is a little bit about a journey that we've started about 18 months ago here at Unum, introducing the principles of lean management and continuous improvement, and the journey that we are on along with some of the wins and challenges. So with that, running kind of blind with the technology, so I'm going to ask that we go to slide 4, which will talk a little bit about the initial pilot. So as background, I joined the company approximately 3 years ago, and the story that I was told when I was being recruited here was lots of great things had happened. We were hitting new levels of profitability on a regular basis. We had recently consolidated a lot of our work from 3 sites into 1, which drove a significant efficiency gain. And the leader that brought me in had indicated that lots of great stuff. Please keep the ship afloat, so to speak. But over the course of a long history that he had with his company, his suspicion was that we may have had some opportunity within the processes that we were using, and if we were to go in, look at those processes, leveraging something like Six Sigma to redesign them, that we'd be much better off. As many of you have probably experienced in your careers, what you think is the problem when you dig under the covers, when you look under the covers, may not always be the same thing, and that's really what we experienced here. So we'll talk a little bit about what that journey looked like and how we ended up to where we are at now. So the first thing that I did was, upon joining the organization, was completely change my onboarding program. The onboarding program that was put together for me was a series of meetings with our senior executive team, a number of peers in the leadership level that I was being brought in at, as well as getting to know some of my management staff. What was omitted in that original onboarding plan was any time with my frontline people that were actually doing the work that I was responsible for now leading. So that struck me as something that needed to be corrected immediately, and I essentially created a new roadmap that included 80 skip levels in the course of about 3 weeks to get to know folks. And it was very, very simple. I wanted people to tell me the 3 things that they took pride in with our company. We have a ton of tenure. Wanted to understand what it was that was important to them that I wanted to, quote, not break. I wanted to understand what they saw as opportunities for their role in their department. And I gave them a chance to ask me anything that they wanted, no limits. And we had a lot of fun with it. But some of the themes, like when I started thinking about synthesis of what I uncovered, there were a couple of things that started to strike me. One was they were shocked that I was sitting down to meet with them. Speaking in terms of tenure, these are folks that have been in the company 10, 15, 20, 25 years, and never had a senior leader sat down with them to understand the work that they do. Separate from that, so there was that struck me as something culturally that was a little bit different than what I was expecting to see. In addition, some of the themes that they talked about with a great deal of pride came a little bit with a red flag. So, for instance, I met with one woman who talked about when she had gone on maternity leave, she was so appreciative that she wasn't worried about coming back to a big pile of work, and of course that's a good thing. But she went on to say that one person, one individual, for the course of 12 weeks, was able to do her entire job in their free time. And, of course, she didn't frame it that way. She was being extremely complimentary. But there was this theme of this overwhelming amount of teamwork, which is great, combined with underneath how is that possible was what was going through my mind at the time. If she's working 40 hours a week and her counterpart is working 40 hours a week, the math is very simple that shouldn't be possible. And I heard a number of examples like it that raised a lot of questions in my mind that I wanted to learn more about. Ultimately, though, what the employees asked me most frequently was, what does it mean to be successful? The timing of my start was our company sends our top 3% of our workforce to Disney every year as a celebration of success. And I had a number of folks who didn't know me from a hole in the wall asking me why they didn't go to Disney. What I promised each of them was I can't give you, obviously 3%, 97% are not going to go, but I should absolutely be able to come back with what were those characteristics, where are you at on that spectrum, and how can we develop an action plan that could potentially get you there. And when I left the room thinking that would be a simple mission to accomplish, I realized that it wasn't, and I realized that we were going to have a very different series of activities that I was now going to lead instead of what they originally had described to me as a couple of process improvement exercises. Basically, one of the many toolkits that I've worked with and been exposed to in my career is this concept of lean management. When I was working with Liberty Mutual, we had embarked on this path. We brought in some consultants to help us learn how companies leverage lean-like principles in their actual management system. What it generally entails at the highest level is getting our managers much closer to their employees and their customer and their process, starting to introduce the concepts of servant leadership, from which the manager's job is to remove obstacles but to solicit ideas for improvement from their workforce on a daily basis. And then there's an entire structure around how we do that, things like daily huddles, a lot of transparency around metrics, cascades, those types of elements to be able to understand how that process is functioning. Is it functioning as necessary or as intended? If not, what countermeasures can be introduced? Prior to doing this, the way we managed our business is what came in, we did. If we saw signs of backlogs, we would throw resources at them. but we never actually understood our process or our systems that our processes were working on, and those systems could be technical or people-based systems to understand what capacity existed in the network. We worked through deploying these tools and brought our organization to a really good point. Over the course of this deployment, we were able to get a pretty significant set of benefits. As you can see, we drove a 40% reduction in cost. That was done without any layoffs, really being able to identify some of our top talent and being able to move them into vacancies in other areas. We were able to virtually eliminate our customer complaints. One of the features in our current in the policies that we were issuing is, I kind of describe it as a double whammy. When you turn age 65, our premiums go up and your benefit goes down. Right now, that is almost 95% of all complaints that come in. It's a contractual provision, not to say that we won't strive to do better education around this, but to actually get ourselves to a point that our hands-down overwhelming number of complaints has gone strictly to something that is functioning as designed, as opposed to truly errors that were being made or bad decisions that were being escalated, was a tremendous switch in terms of the types of issues that we were addressing previously with customer engagement. From an employee engagement perspective, and I'll tell a couple of stories that relate to employee engagement, but from an employee engagement perspective, what we started to hear were things like, we've never functioned like this as a team. We didn't realize what it really means to be a team. A lot of folks had a very high level of pride and ownership in the individual work that was on their desk, but they didn't trust one another to help each other. So if somebody was out of the office on vacation time, in these short-term things, obviously the maternity example is an extreme where you can't do a workaround. But when people were out for vacation, when people were out for an afternoon, instead of having somebody step up to help our customer, that work sat and waited because they didn't trust that their counterpart would be able to help as well as they could. We were able to switch that dynamic quickly through some of the standard operating procedures that we introduced to make their work easier. Speaking to the employee part in this HR piece, I won HR over with two simple stories. The first was when we started to set this up and identify our work and identify time standards, process standards, those types of elements. One of the employees that was selected early on to be part of this was considered a top performer. She had all the right attributes in our culture that lacked measurement. She was happy to help others. She was always taking part in community events. She never had a backlog. All these things, and I'd be the first to say what I've learned over this kind of journey, as well as some others in my past, is people aren't black or white. There tends to be a gray area. All of those things that I just described are great attributes. However, when we actually started to understand how she was doing her work, she was exceptional. She was doing a great, great, great job. She was doing such a great job that she was doing her entire week's worth of work in 10 hours over a significant length of time. This is over a year and a half that she had been working roughly 10 hours a week. When we started to try to figure out how that's possible and started to take some more kind of behind-the-scenes technology, invasive technology, to be able to figure out what's going on there, found that she was running a rental property company in her free time, found that she was studying for law school online in her free time, and it then spoke to, wait a minute, clearly all of those good things, it comes with this other side, and how do we address that? The other part of this, when we, in HR was definitely struck by that. This management by anecdote clearly had failed us when I used that example in that story. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we had a woman that was being managed out. She was in the third and final phase of performance management within our company. And what she was faced with was she was always considered not to be a team player. She wasn't asking others to offering herself to help. She always had a backlog. She must be slow. And, to me that raised two things. One, not quite sure what the management philosophy was, not sure how this woman could have been taking on more work if she had a backlog. So it spoke to what is our management team really looking at when we say these things. But the other part of it was trying to understand what was this woman's throughput. to go into some of the math, to go into some of the process, a backlog by itself doesn't mean anything to me. It means that there's a need for us to help our customer faster, but it doesn't mean that somebody's fast or slow. There's other metrics that would indicate that, and none of those metrics existed that I was aware of in our organization. And lo and behold, when we actually introduced those measures, this woman was 2.5 times faster than the standard folks on the floor. Not making that number up. 2.5 times faster than our peers, with impeccable quality. We gave her 3 times as much work as the standard employee because the way we allocated our work wasn't intelligent. This woman went from being managed out to the very following year. She was in Disney celebrating being recognized as one of the top 3% in our company. So when we talk about the fears that this model may introduce, the idea that it may introduce micromanagement, and some of those were the questions that HR had coming in, this is the reason why. It's about our employees. It's about our customer. It's not about cutting costs. There's a lot of easier ways to cut costs. That's what set the stage for us to take this from a grassroots project. This was something I did in my free time as an operations manager. And if we go to slide 5, we'll talk about how we're bringing that now to scale. So that was a really easy pilot. I was the manager. Everybody was in one site. If I wanted to delay production to take folks off their day-to-day routine to make things happen, we could do it. And it was really grassroots. It was looking for no investment, let alone low investment. The time that was all happening, in our company, we had a number of different events taking place. Our IT organization was reorganized with layoffs. Our marketing team was reorganized with layoffs. We had a lot of those traditional type of activities to manage costs taking place. And at the same time that was all happening, my senior vice president is in a position that's very different than everybody else. He is hiring to support growth. He raised his quota because of the new sales roles that we brought in to support growth. And he's not being, quote, forced into making these very difficult decisions around cost cutting. And the CEO of our organization asked, how's that happening? What can we learn from it? And we introduced this new model that you can see here on slide 5 as we look to bring this program to scale. Essentially what the program consists of are 4 lenses. So when we talk about I'll say the first and foremost for me as a learning experience was going from the operations leader, where there's a little bit less likelihood of the management team and the frontline employees pushing back because they truly reported in. I had direct influence. Even I quite honestly was ignorant to that. I didn't realize how easy that was going to make things, relatively speaking. So when we start talking about bringing this program to scale, how do we do a lot more around culture and behavior? Because quite honestly, some of our senior leaders are looking at a company that is performing incredibly well and saying, why do we need to do this? So when we start with the culture and behavior, it's recognizing that we need to be able to help lead our executives straight through our front line, through this kind of audacious goal setting, through this new mindset, through this, I describe myself as risk averse, and the company, some of my counterparts would say I'm the most aggressive person in the company. My view of risk aversion is if we stand still, we'll get beaten. And that scares the heck out of me. And that, to me, is an incredible risk that forces me to feel a drive to act. Our company has been incredibly stable. And a lot of our senior leaders look at it as change could disrupt what's going really well. And everybody throws out the what if Google comes and wants to play in this space, or what if Amazon wants to come and play in this space, and they're looking and saying, well, wait a minute, that might be a lightning bolt. Is that really why we would drive a significant change? So we start with culture and behavior to get everybody on the same page. The operations management piece is what we just talked a little bit about. It's the pilot that I had started around truly an operations management framework. It's all about people and management at this point, with a light touch on process. And that process piece is really around standardization. We knew, and we were evolving to, and we've now accelerated, what that does is it helps bring stability. It helps identify how we can actually treat our processes as levers and manage our business better. But the idea of actually introducing true end-to-end process redesign is now being introduced to accelerate what those benefits look and feel like for our customer. And it's important that I say that. It's about our customer. Historically, when we've had projects, we've always had those projects with a heavy emphasis on internal efficiency and bottom line savings. Of course, that's important, but at the end of the day, if we are making things easier for ourselves and harder for our customers, we've completely lost. So we're really trying to put that emphasis around end-to-end focus on process improvement for our customer. The last of these four lenses, so to speak, is how do we then enable those processes? At this point, if we've gone through these, really two lenses, the operations management and the process piece, we should have a pretty good process, one that has stripped out a lot of waste, one that has the customer at the forefront of its goals and objectives, and we're able to consistently meet or exceed our customer expectation. At that point, and I think this was a big change for our IT strategy from years past, at that point is when you bring in IT. And they certainly should have a seat at the table to help us as we're thinking about things. But historically, we always looked at IT as, well, we'll just ask IT to go fix it. Well, that's impossible. They don't know the business requirements. We can't articulate the business process. So by actually having a very defined, clean process that we're confident meets needs, then we're in a much, much better spot to work with our IT partners to bring in solutions that make that process even easier and or automated. The goal of our program, you've heard me say customer a lot. You heard me talk with pride about our employees. And at the end of it, there's no doubt if we do these things well, the efficiency is the easy part of it. A lot of organizations make the mistake of leading with the efficiency piece, which can be completely underwhelming for engagement, can be completely underwhelming with the culture and behavior, and it's a common reason why some of these initiatives may fall flat. If we go to the next slide, there's an additional lens that we're talking about while we go through and look to bring that benefit to our organization. I would really describe that around, we've started to use this language of what we're calling the efficiency frontier, meaning if we do those things well, those are table stakes. We should have good management systems in place. We should have good processes in place, and they should all be enabled by a common IT strategy that makes things work together well. If we do that, especially in the insurance space where there's a lot of legacy systems across the industry. We may not have been the front runners from an industry perspective in driving change. That will get us quite a bit further down the path to customer excellence than we are at today. When we start talking about model office, this is how we go well above and beyond that efficiency frontier, so to speak. The concept of model office is how do we pull ourselves back entirely outside of our current construct and really start designing from scratch. Like many companies, if you were to look at our processes and you were to look at our systems, you would see that we've had multiple acquisitions and mergers. You would see that we've had multiple changes in our product offering. You'll see that there were a lot of different bolt-on things that came about over time. But if you actually take continue to go further and further away and look and say, here's our customers' needs of today. Here's our series of systems and processes that have been identified. Does it make sense? The answer is an overwhelming heck no. Because a lot of our systems and processes evolved over time, and that evolution is clunky at best. So what Model Office is designed to do is allow us to rethink all of that. We're looking at this Model Office approach to do a couple of different things. One, help us with a framework for where we choose to have those customer moments of truth that we choose to differentiate ourselves, as well as this will start serving as the framework for our IT system requirements of the future. When we start looking at trying to move into a single holistic platform, going from that agile technology, i.e. robotics, simple fixes like that, into more of an enterprise solution that is cutting edge. So that is what we're looking at when we talk about Model Office. The approach is really simple in the sense that we bring together folks across that customer experience. They span across our people, process, and technology, so all of the relevant stakeholders for a given customer experience in the same collaborative space. Access to the right level of IT. I'll say I think this is something I've seen in other companies, and would love to hear from other folks on the call if they don't feel the same way, but we tend to spread our IT dollars way too thin. We try to do a little bit of everything for everyone, when the reality is, from a customer impact perspective, it might be better to do 3 things really well than 50 things okay. And that's what we start talking about, is how do we get that rapid development of IT and deployment so that we're able to really start thinking and providing a very different customer experience on what we would consider those moments of truth. There's going to be areas where meeting expectations is more than appropriate, or is exactly appropriate is a better way of phrasing it. But there's going to be some of those moments that we want to shift from. Like right now, I'll say we take a lot of pride in how service recovery is performed here. But what we want to start switching our future state to is how do we eliminate the need for service recovery? And if we do that, what are those other moments of truth where we can really shine with our customer in a way that has them wanting to come back more and more? So with that to me is a high-level overview of the roadmap that we've put in place in terms of how we're planning to go from a good company to great. To use all the business cliches, I should be having a tick list at this point. But would love to hear your questions or feedback.
Thank you so much for that, Matt. We really enjoyed your presentation. Before I go out and check the chat of questions that were submitted, do we have any live questions? It is *6 to unmute your line and go ahead with your question. Okay, we received several questions during your presentation, Matt. These questions came in throughout the presentation, so you may have touched on these, but I'm going to ask them all anyway, just in case there's something that you'd like to add to or elaborate on.
Sure.
Our first member says, when you met with the staff to discuss their roles, were you met with any resistance, especially from tenured staff? It seems odd someone would basically tell you their job can be done by someone else. Did you end up doing any reductions in force?
Awesome questions. So let's see. In terms of any resistance, it was more of a kind of a skepticism or a question what my ulterior motive was. So the fact that I was to sit down and want to meet with them was a very surprising concept to them, and they didn't know why I was doing that, and it took a little while for them to, I always said, like, I can't ask you to trust me, I have to earn your trust, but I kept saying over time my behavior, my actions will allow you to trust me, but the reason why I'm meeting with you is I don't know how you could expect me to be a credible leader if I don't understand what it is that you do and then be able to support you in what you need. And I think, as they kind of tested me on that, it allowed me to build trust. I certainly wasn't doing it for any illicit reasons at all. In terms of the breakdown, the kind of the responses between tenured and relatively new folks, it's actually a really interesting dynamic. I had roughly 2 halves of the team. So I mentioned that the work had been consolidated across from 2 sites into 1. Literally, I had half my team that had an average tenure of 15 years with a high water mark of 42, and half my team averaged less than 3 years of tenure with almost the exact same start dates. I would say the level of the perception was that the tenured folks would go kicking and screaming, and that the new folks were all millennials that were going to love it. And I would say that what I loved about it is there's elements of those stereotypes that can be true. What I loved about it is that we consistently saw the opposite. Especially when it came to the tenured folks. I had a couple that, one woman in particular was awesome. She was a little salty, if you will, was very comfortable at where she was at in her career, that she didn't need to make me happy. And what she told me, though, was awesome. She said, I've been through acquisition after acquisition. I've made it this far. Bring it on. Hopefully this isn't the flavor of the month. And she told me that I needed to prove it to her because she thought it was. But she was very comfortable that she's been through worse. Again, how do we change from negative context to positive? But that she was completely open to seeing what this was going to be because it sounded like the company trusted me, and it sounded like I had a background that was coming from a good spot. So she was going to be cautiously optimistic. So I had a handful of folks that fell into that tenured bucket that really would identify very well with that this was just potentially just another change, and they were able to become advocates for it. On the millennial side, I used that HR example, and I would say the millennial side was probably, in that same kind of boat, 50-50. Some of the ones that, a common theme for those that were happy about this was they wanted to have their workload and their performance properly understood, using some of their words, that their manager didn't know what they were doing. And they wanted to be properly rewarded and recognized for it. And those folks both did incredibly well in the system, as well as embraced it from day one. One of the millennials, though, was that 10-hour employee that I told the story about. So we definitely had a little bit of a sense of entitlement, I'll say, with the millennials. And I hate to use that stereotype because I think sometimes that can be dangerous with how we manage employees and as if they fit into a box. But there was definitely an element of this is how we've always managed our workload. I'm doing what you asked me to do. The fact that I can do it in 10 hours, like I was almost dumbfounded by this woman's response where she truly, I took the approach, this is all clean slate and it's all about making things better. We're not going to have a discipline for that. She needs to pick up tomorrow and start making things better, Val. And it amazed me that she actually was, instead of incredibly appreciative, because in other organizations I've worked for, that would have been easy grounds for termination, she actually went kicking and screaming that she didn't know why she needed to do more than 10 hours a week. And then in terms of the reduction in force, no, I am so proud to be able to say that we did not use a reduction in force in order to capture these savings. I gave up virtually all of my top people into vacancies that were surrounding me in order to capture the benefit. So you can imagine what the performance improvement could have been if I had kept those people. But most important to me is this system, this idea that involves our employees raising opportunities that we can then go and fix. You can imagine that works once well, and then it quickly stops working the day that they see that the reward for that is that they get laid off. So one of the most common pitfalls of a lean program is that it's designed to drive layoffs, especially when it's being done in the environment that we were in, which is you might be able to do that successfully in an organization where there's a burning platform. If we don't do this, like I was just speaking to an executive recently that was an auto parts supplier, and when the economy burst, they knew that they had to cut their costs by 40% in order to survive. That wasn't an option. Layoffs had to happen, and it allowed folks to work through that. In our environment, for us to drive layoffs, to have a bigger record-breaking year, I can't even say it without feeling like that's completely disrespectful to our employees. And, that to me is one of the best things that we try to do around education, around the real lean principles, especially when you look at some of the learnings that America has had from the Japanese that introduced this, is absolutely the respect and the foundation that our employees need and provide for us.
Thank you so much for that. Our next member says, your fifth slide depicts employee engagement as separate from culture. Do you actually see it that way?
So, not necessarily. So let me speak to what that's designed to illustrate. So the four lenses, the four circles in the middle, they're very specific activities that are designed to drive an outcome, and the outcomes are on the outer rings. So we have very specific culture and behavior activities designed to help drive engagement, but in terms of them being one and the same, absolutely, they're directly connected for sure. What we're trying to show is what the activities are compared to what the actual output of KPIs would represent.
Thank you so much for that. Our next member wants to know, did you at one point have two models up and running at the same time as you switched over? How did you deal with that?
Yes, so HR would love you for asking that question because right now we're still in that situation. So as we look to bring this to, in my original environment, the answer I'll start with was no. All of my organization, I had complete trust that this was going to be a better way of working. So To me, it's let's jump in and do this. For better or worse, I probably have learned more about change management in the last 1 year of my career than the first 19. But we just jumped in and did it. Where we're now at, bringing this to scale requires us to be in a kind of a dual environment. So we're working closely with HR, and we have HR at the table for every organization that we go into and start deploying this toolkit, so that they're able to understand the unique challenges and changes that it's both driving and that it requires in some of our hiring and talent profiles, because we're really shifting a lot in terms of what it means to be a manager, particularly in this model. But for the period of probably 3 years, there'll be an element of, quote, the old way and the new way as we go through the broader organization.
Thank you so much for that. We had one more question come in. The member wanted to know, did you capture best practices and share them throughout the organization?
Yes. So starting with so part of what we do in the actual operations management work, that operations management component, when I talked about standardization. So what we really want to make sure that we are practicing, and I say this as a person that came in from operations that couldn't stand consultants, and I smile now as I have worked myself into a consultant role that I need to stop saying that. But we wanted to make sure that the employees felt that they built this, and that so when we started talking about standardized operating procedures, we went through this exercise of being able to understand by process, by operator, who's doing what the best, and how do we then bring that to the masses. And you can only imagine the amount of different macros that individuals had written on their own desktop. That was the 10-hour employee. She wrote an incredible macro that automated half of her work. So as we started to use that data, that was one of the most important pieces, was how do we identify what the best practices are from a work perspective that we could standardize. Above and beyond that, we also started to do that with our managers. So, when we think about what we were doing differently in the new way compared to the old way, the new way involves data. The old way didn't. The new way involves a much, much different level of transparency. The old way didn't. So we have a regular forum where those managers that have gone through our training get together on a weekly basis, where they can ask questions around challenges that they're having, as well as be able to offer up best practices. And one of the things that we're extremely proud of is our playbook, so to speak, is constantly evolving based on that feedback as well. We have a small team that's responsible for what we refer to as methodology and standards, so that as those ideas are brought forward, vetted, tested, we're then able to process. So it's us practicing what we preach when we talk about that cycle.
Thank you so much for the Matt. I think we've covered everyone's questions today. Do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the members before we end the summit today?
I would just wish everybody the best. If anybody has questions, certainly my email is on the front page of the slide. I would say that I came in looking at lean as something that was too soft, too fuzzy, and not aggressive enough. That was my reaction 4 years ago. What I've come to see from it is it's an incredible way to get your entire workforce involved in making things better. And with that, I kind of laugh and call myself a recovering Six Sigma black belt, where we used words in that model of entitlement, of process capability, really trying to have people work as if they're robots, which isn't real. And what Lean offers is a very different approach that allows everybody to play, and when the organization's rowing together, it's a great combination. So wish everybody well in their journey, and look forward to staying in touch in the future.
Well, Matt, simply wonderful thoughts. On behalf of all the executives on the line, I'd like to thank you for sharing such powerful ideas and key thoughts with us today. Your involvement and dedication to the profession sets a high benchmark for others to follow. For all the participants on today's call, thank you for your continued membership and insightful questions for today's speaker. The meeting is now officially concluded. Thanks again so much, Matt.